Here is the seminar structure for this seminar. First, we're going to talk about the second speaker role, then we're going to move on to some of the elements of it. I'm going to cover something called the split, which is basically how we distribute the arguments among first speakers and second speakers. Next, I'm going to talk about argument extension, and after that, we're going to have Yanni talk about rebuttal and time management. So let's get into it. Starting with the role of the second speaker. The second speaker has some important tasks that they need to do. First of all, they need to rebut the opposing team's case that they already presented. After that, they have to extend the arguments that their first speaker presented in their first speech. And finally, they have to present a new argument. We're gonna start a bit backwards and start with talking about the arguments and then move on to rebuttal, as that would be the way that you're gonna be handling it and preparing it in a real life debate. You're gonna first have your arguments and argument extensions, and right after that, you're gonna be doing the rebuttal. Even though in your speech it's gonna be the other way around. So let's talk about the split, or otherwise, as I said, the distribution of arguments between the first speaker and second speaker. So, as we know, here are the third speakers. We know that the first two have to present all the arguments that you have in your case. We know that the third speaker cannot present any new arguments. And we know that the first speaker is going to present some arguments, and then the second speaker is also going to do that. And that's what we call the split. And there are strategic ways of doing the split, and we're going to cover them now, starting with a slight exercise for you. It's your task to choose which is the better split in your opinion. Should you split your arguments between the first speaker and the second speaker based on logical lines and group them based on them, or should you have each speaker take the argument that they like most? I'm going to give you some time to think about it. You can also get in the comments and say what you think the answer is. Okay, so yeah, Coco, you're raising your hand.
I feel like grouping the arguments along logical lines is definitely the better option.
Precisely, that is definitely the better option. Some beginner debaters might feel more comfortable debating the arguments that they have thought of, but sometimes that's not always the logical decision, especially if you have thought of a very important argument as a second speaker that the judge will expect in the first speech, and therefore it would be better to give it to the first speaker. A good split will ensure that both speeches are equally convincing that the team's case is true. To what I said right now, if you have an important argument that's not placed in the right speech, you might have one speech that feels a bit more definitive towards the other as to why your side should win the debate. More often than not happens that the second speaker is really derived from content, and the judge listening to their speech on its own cannot be convinced that the case that they're trying to defend is true. Here are some examples of common splits or common groupings of how to base your arguments and distribute them among speakers. One of them could be the first speaker talking about the arguments that affect society as a whole, and then the second speaker will talk about some more individual arguments. Then we might have international or domestic groupings, such as talking the way how the motion impacts people on an international level or just on a domestic one, such as the individual country or region. We can have military or political, and all of these others that are here. Those are common splits that you might encounter and that you might need to use when you're deciding how to distribute arguments. However, it is very important that you find a split that works for your case. This means that you should not always simply use the list of common splits. For example, you can have a motion that calls for having arguments that are grouped based on the way they affect society and economic reasons. So you can have one and the other and combine them together. You can have arguments that are based on moral virtues and political arguments. Therefore, feel free to use all of different groupings as long as they make sense. And here's some additional advice on splitting. Always consider the stakeholders and the status quo. We covered those elements in the previous seminar, stakeholders being the people that are affected directly by the motion, and status quo being the current situation. So also a split should be intrinsic to a speech, which means that you should not announce that you're doing the split. You should just do it and have it as a part of your speech, but not like just say, I'm gonna do the split and I'm gonna talk about the moral side of the part, and then the second speaker is gonna do about the practical. Yeah. And also, always ask yourselves what needs to come first. As I said, sometimes some arguments are more obvious or more important, and the judge will expect to hear them in the first speech. Therefore, it would be better to put them in the first speech. And also don't leave your second speakers with just examples. Make sure they have solid content that they can use so they can have a speech that is equally convincing as the first one. Okay, and now we're gonna do a small exercise once again. We have the motion this house as Bulgaria would leave the EU. First, I'd like to think about the actors, um, the stakeholders, and probably also the current status quo. After you have potentially thought of some of those, I'd like you to think what arguments could be made based on those stakeholders and status quo, and choose two terms that you can use for a split when choosing to make your arguments. This might take some time, so I'm going to give you 1 or 2 minutes to think about it, and if you have any questions, you can ask, and I'm going to guide you with it. Okay, we have a comment. Domestic and international. Yeah, that could be a way that we handle it. We can first look at the way that leaving the EU would affect us on a governmental level, how it would it be beneficial for Bulgaria as the country. International level, well, we could use that. I think we should consider the actor of the motion. Yes, Coco?
I think that economic and political might
Mm-hmm.
be there.
Okay. Yeah, for example, a split could be economic and political. We can focus on the first page, for example, the economic reason why Bulgaria would be better off if it's not a part of the EU, and then some of the political, such as the current state of the EU and the things like Brexit, and consider them. What I want to come back to is with the domestic international about the way we do this split in this motion is that we have Bulgaria as the actor. Therefore, the international implications of the arguments that we might be using might not be as effective as the domestic ones. So, for example, we can do a split between the splits that we have now suggested between Coco and the one in the comments. We can do how it affects Bulgaria on a domestic level, and also political reasons as to why we should do it. We also had a comment long-term and short-term. That's also a way we can handle that. We can focus on short-term benefits of Bulgaria leaving the EU, and then the next speaker covers the long-term, or vice versa, depending on how you think it's going to be best to cover in the motion. Here is another example. This house believes that all education should be free. How can we make a split? Once again, think about the stakeholders in this debate, considering we are debating education. Yes, Kako.
Uh, I think that individual and society, or society and then individual.
Alright, can you give me an example on the individual that we'll be focusing on?
We'll be probably focusing on family that probably doesn't have the financial leverage to offer good education for their children, and we should probably uh, go into or inspect that situation.
Alright, or to be more specific, we will focus on the way that free education would affect the students and their ability to get education. Um,
Yes.
yeah, that's a great way to put it. And another thing I wanted to mention about um, splitting and using these terms, um, sometimes you need to get more specific. Individual is not really always gonna be like enough to have as your reasoning and grouping. A more concrete grouping is, as in this case, students or society could be more looking at the way um, we as a community would grow if you have free education. I see we have another comment. Uh, Practical and long term. Okay, this can, and we also have social and practical. I see we have two practicals. Yeah, we can definitely cover it in a practical manner. We can also do an opposition saying that it might be impractical to have all education be free, or on a proposition explain why it would be practical in the long term. Those are all good ways to split it. Final example, this house would abolish the Olympic Games. Once again, think about the actors who is involved in in the Olympic Games. Um, how are they affected in the status quo? Yes, go.
Um, Social and economic.
Okay, in what way would you do that?
I think that the Olympic Games is such a big event that it can sometimes be very important for one country to host such event because uh, it can affect the economy of that country.
Mm-hmm.
Since it brings a lot of eyeballs, and also social because the Olympic Games are something that many athletes um, try to get to, and many those athletes have families who are fans of what the athletes do, and there are also people who are fans of professional sport, and that they might be affected by the abolishment of the Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm. All right. You mentioned countries, and that way we can also circle it around to domestics, such as how a country would be affected if the Olympic Games would be abolished. For example, the host countries, would they be better off or not? We can also focus it on the individual, um, considering the individual who is, in this case, to be more specific, the Olympian athlete that is. Trying their whole life to get to the Olympics and suddenly they're abolished, what happens now? And why would be or would it not be beneficial? Okay, then we're gonna move on. If we don't have any other splits, no. We're gonna move on. Um, First, I'm gonna ask if there are any questions, if there's anything that I might be able to explain better if someone didn't get it. You can also shoot them in the chat. Until then, we're moving on. So, and now we're gonna talk about how to extend arguments. Uh, Extending arguments is a good thing because it helps you support what the first speaker already said by providing more content. Speeches are just so long, so sometimes the first speaker might not have enough time to present their arguments to the fullest, but also it's strategic to also have content that you're presenting for some arguments in two speeches. And now I'm going to explain why. First, how to do it though. Um, you have to just tell the judge you're doing it by telling them which argument you're going to be extending, mentioning the claim of the argument, which is also the name of the argument. Then you expand on basically every element of an argument that we discussed in last seminar, starting with the analysis or the warrant, and talking more about the points that were probably already rebutted by the opposing team and kind of trying to defend them. Providing additional examples can also be helpful, and most of all, providing new and deeper impacts based on your analysis and examples. Why should we do it though? Why should we extend those arguments when there have already been perfect arguments that have been said in the first speech? The first reason is to have a more consistent presentation of your case. That way you have every argument shown in every speech. If you do not tell me in some way that you care about this argument in your second speeches, in your third speeches, and so on, I'm gonna think that you do not care about your argument that much, and therefore I, as a judge, am not gonna really take it into consideration because I've heard it in the first speech and then I have forgotten about it. It's your job to remind me of this argument and reinforce it and make it stronger. And the other reason to do it is because it makes the opposition's team job much harder. Seeing it here. Here, an opponent's task during their speech. Without your side's argument extension, if you decide not to do this, then they'll have to rebut your third argument, address your rebuttal, and present their third argument. Those are still a lot of tasks, but they're quite manageable for them to do. If you provide argument extension, now the opposing team has to do much more stuff. They have to do all those three mentioned above, but they also have to rebut your argument extension for argument 1 and rebut your argument extension for argument 2, eating up from their precious time. If they do not do it, your argument stands and therefore you win the debate. So they have to take this time. And also they'll be forced, even if they were not planning on doing argument extension, they're forced to do it because, and it would eat up more from their time, because if they do not do it, they have these weak arguments that they have said in the first speech and you have already rebutted, and you on your side have the extensions, and that's something that you have more than them, and that would be taken in account by the judge. Questions on argument extension? Do we have any? Yes, Coco.
Uh, an argument extension can't be just an example, right? And another example that proves the argument.
It shouldn't be, because an example does not really prove the argument. Analysis and impacts do. An example is only going to show you how it works in the real world. And as I said in the beginning, somewhere in the beginning of the seminar, uh, having just example and deriving your second speaker from content would make their speech weaker, and the judge would not really be able to consider it as an impactful speech, such as the first speech.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Okay, if we do not have any more questions, we are gonna move on to the next part, which is gonna be presented by Yanni, rebuttal and time management.
Hey everybody, I just want to make sure that I am visible and audible. I apparently am both visible and audible. Okay, that's wonderful. Give me a second to share my screen. Okay. Do you all see my presentation?
Yeah.
We do.
Okay, thank you. So, without further ado, first of all, some introductions. Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yani. I'm this year's graphic designer. My credentials for being on this seminar is that I've been debating for 2-ish years, which is not a long time. But if I can change your mind, I've been a 4-time finalist and at least a 3-time semi-finalist, so I do have a little bit of credential. And now I'm gonna get on it, but first of all, trigger warning, as a wise man that maybe in this call once said, I'm gonna speak a little bit fast, judges, listen up. So, my presentation is gonna be about rebuttal and time management. So, first of all, I'm gonna give you the table of contents, what we're gonna talk about here. First of all, we're gonna cover for the new debaters, what rebuttal is and why it is important. And after that, we're gonna go in 4 different types of rebuttal. First of all, direct rebuttal. Second, comparative analysis. 3, mitigation. And 4, disputing the uniqueness. Then we're gonna cover some quick tips for rebuttal. And then we're gonna enter into my last section, which is time management and how to fit all of this whole thing into an 8-minute speech. So let's start with what rebuttal is. In a nutshell, rebuttal consists of the argument that your team raises in response to the argument of your opposition. So I, as the opposition, give an argument, and then the proposition side has to somehow address that argument. And every rebuttal should be like a normal argument. It requires more than just the opposition is wrong. This is a common mistake that novice debaters tend to fall down in. They tend to think that just disagreeing in a general statement with the idea of a certain argument makes rebuttal. That is not how it works. A rebuttal works more similarly to an argument, whereas it requires analysis, it requires mechanization, which is also known as the warrant to an argument. So to win a debate, you not only have to give well-analyzed strong arguments, but you also have to engage with the content given by the opposing team. So you can not only be good at giving positive content, you should also be good at giving negative content, which is what rebuttal is. This can happen by rebutting the arguments, mitigating their impact, or weighing them by comparison to your own arguments, which I'm gonna get in a little bit later. Why is it important? Just to really convince you that you should do rebuttal. First of all, it gives you an advantage when comparing the importance of the arguments given in the debate. That is pretty obvious, since you have spent an amount of time disproving and minimizing the effects of the arguments of the opposing team. Yours then, in comparison, seem more full and seem stronger. Second of all, it is crucial if your argument is in a direct clash with an argument made by the opposing team. This is very likely to happen because you have one motion. The proposition, for example, is going to say, this thing, if we implement this thing, is going to help society. But the opposition may say, if we implement this thing, it may be detrimental to the society. So this is a direct clash. And in order to break that direct clash and for one of the arguments to stand above the other and for your side to win, you have to directly rebuttal that argument. Third, it makes the opposing team spend time defending their own arguments instead of attacking yours. This is, again, self-explanatory. You're kind of pushing the ball in their court, and now they have to do defense instead of offense on your own side. And 4, it helps the judge determine the winner of the round. It may happen, it's actually very likely to happen, for both teams to do a sort of reasonably good job at building and presenting their arguments. And what's really gonna make the winner of the debate is how well one of those teams has rebutted or defended their arguments and how much of that content still stands to the end of the debate. On to my next slide, which is our first method of the rebuttal, which is the most intuitive one, direct rebuttal. This is a type of offensive analysis. Analysis is a synonym for warrant or explanation, a mechanized way into explaining a concept sort of following the logical steps. So this is a type of offensive analysis that disputes the thesis, mechanisms, and impact of the argument, also known as claim, warrant, and impact of an argument. So this aims to prove that the general logic of the statement or argument is solely incorrect. Now I'm going to give you an example of that, with something that I've seen myself in a debate, just so you know this is credible. I'm not making up arguments. This is something that I have actually experienced. We're going to go off the motion this House would ban surveillance technology in the workplace. In this case, the opposition might argue that we shouldn't ban surveillance technology in the workplace because surveillance technology will make workers more productive by stopping them from engaging in unnecessary activities in the workplace. This will make employees feel more satisfied with their work and will boost the profits of the company, which will in turn later trickle down to raising the salaries of the workers themselves, which raises the quality of living. Here's a very shortened claim warrant impact structure. Now, the direct rebuttal to that would be attacking the logical connection between that, attacking the sole claim that this will actually make workers more productive. And here I'm doing direct clash to this. I'm directly opposing the statement by saying that this technology will make workers even less productive. But I can't cut it there. I can't just say, well, that's not true. They're going to be less productive. That's not effective rebuttal, and the judge won't consider that as an effective rebuttal. In order to make it effective, you have to go through a few logical steps, which I've written down below. So, first of all, why would they be more or less productive? They'll be less productive because they'll be experiencing constant stress of being watched and the pressure to perform, which will distract workers and use a large part of their mental capacity. Because when you know that your boss is always surveilling you, you feel stressed over gaining some negatives, maybe being shortened, fired, or your salary lessened if you don't perform as well as the boss expects you to. This stresses you out, which makes you constantly stressed, which accumulates in time, and that stress lowers your ability to focus and work effectively. Due to the fear of being reprimanded, workers don't take the necessary breaks in order to keep up their energy levels and be productive. So now I've explained you three levels why I will be less productive. Adding a fourth, the mental toll on workers can even impact and damage their physical health, preventing them from effectively doing their job on one more level. So now I've given you 4 levels on which that statement will be incorrect. And each of those levels is strengthening and strengthening and strengthening my rebuttal, which means in turn weakening the rebuttal of the opposition. Second method, competitive analysis. This engages with the assumed burden of proof of the opposition side rather than directly addressing a specific statement. So what I did in the last method, I directly rebutted an argument. What I'm going to be doing here, if you don't know what an assumed burden of proof is, it is the burden that the one side of the debate inherently has. The proposition inherently has to prove the motion, and the opposition inherently has to disprove it. So instead of attacking one specific argument or statement, I'm just going to be attacking their whole side in general. This proves why it is highly improbable for the opposing team to even be able to achieve their desired results. And I'm going to give you an example for that as well. Oh, but that's going to come in the next slide because first we're going to cover mitigation. So what is mitigation? This proves why the argument of the opposing side isn't as relevant or impactful as they present it to be. This is mostly used in cases when you cannot think of one of the other 2 types of rebuttal, when an argument seems to you very strong and you can't push any logical connections from it, or you're already pushed and you want to take this as an extra step to sort of make sure that the argument is really as weak as it can be. Mitigation doesn't completely destroy the argument, but it makes it easier to weigh against your own arguments or other possible negatives. So what you're doing is essentially explaining why the problem that the opposition may be presenting is not this big grand thing that's gonna explode the world and affect all of us. Rather, it's this smaller inconsequential thing we shouldn't really care about. So on to the example. I have one example, one motion for both of those. The motion is one I've debated as well. This House believes that cultural treasures should be returned to their places of origin. A prop argument for that may be that those cultural treasures will greatly benefit the national identity and education of the local people when returned to the place of origin because they will be more accessible to those people. This will build a stronger sense of community, which will lead to those people being mutually helpful to one another. So, first of all, I'm going to present you the competitive analysis on that motion and the side of proposition. So, on competitive analysis, rather than attacking that argument, I'm just gonna attack the whole side of the proposition and try to prove to you why what that makes it improbable to happen. Because an argument essentially has three main pillars that it stands on: why it's important, why it is probable, and why it is exclusive. And now in the last two, we were attacking why it was no in these last two ones, competitive analysis and the indirect rebuttal, we're attacking why it's probable. In mitigation, you're attacking why it is important. So, in competitive analysis, you would say establishing the country of origin is nearly impossible. Again, not enough. You have to analyze and mechanize how that works. Why is that? Because I don't believe you as a judge if you just say that. Establishing the country of origin is nearly impossible, but because that country or culture may have no undisputable descendants, which means that the country may no longer exist. The people of that culture may not be strongly represented. They may not even be alive. That culture may have died somewhere. That place of land may be split between a lot of countries. So that gives one level of difficulty to establishing the country of origin. Second of all, the documentation of the origin either do not exist or have been destroyed, because most of the time when treasures are being stolen, they're being stolen during wars or during colonization, and none of those two actors, the colonizers and the people that perpetuate war, have any incentive to document the things that they steal. Even if those documents did exist, they would try to cover up their heinous acts by, for example, burning the documents. So that adds a second level of difficulty to the side of the proposition. Third of all, carbon dating is way too vague. Yes, it may narrow it down to a specific time period. Yes, you may kind of vaguely be able to shape where geographically that happened based on the trends in history, but it is not pinpointed enough to be able to be given to one specific culture and one specific land in most cases. And taking all that in mind, it is way more dangerous to try and do this because it's uncertain, and due to that uncertainty, it will create cultural and political tension. This is kind of a very extensive rebuttal that is majorly making it more difficult from the side of proposition to even be able to debate a case. And now on to mitigation. I'm going to take that argument about cultural treasures greatly benefiting the national identity. Seeing that argument the word greatly, I'm going to spin that around. I'm going to say that a very small amount of people will actually see that. Because the argument presents it like it's going to affect the whole nation and everything's going to be good and great. But actually, people live very busy lives. People have a lot of important issues in their lives. People may have family issues. People have to go to work. People have to put food on the table. People might be dealing with complex infrastructural or political issues in their country. Their first concern on their mind is not a returned cultural treasure to a maybe hypothetical museum. That is the first step. And the second step is that it is difficult to rewire an already ingrained mindset and rebuild a community. Because the impact of this argument relies on the fact that this cultural treasure is going to build national identity in order to help society. But it is very difficult for already grown up or kind of adolescent person who has already established a strong mental connection to their country and a strong opinion. It is extremely difficult for that to all be changed by a single piece of, for example, rock or wood. So now I'm mitigating the impact. Now I've proved why this impact may happen for very, very little people and may not have wide societal effects. And in order to fully destroy it, I have to say that if we choose to have this minimal impact, we risk having high damages to the artifact. So this makes this argument not worth going through it. Now, after that was very long. I do apologize. We're going to the fourth method of disputing, which is personally my favorite one. It's disputing uniqueness. This proves that a certain impact can be achieved by other more valid methods, or that it is dependent on a lot of other outside factors. This shows that a certain policy is unnecessary and may bring more harm than good. So what this is doing, this is not directly logically disproving, this is not affecting the burden of proof, not affecting the argument. What it is doing instead is proving that that argument has that impact that that side of the debate is proving, sorry, somebody's vacuuming somewhere here, apologies. um it is proving that that argument and those impacts that that side is trying to achieve are achievable in other way easier ways, and it can happen in another way. Oh my god, somebody can stop vacuuming, can you? Oh, it's so distracting, I'm sorry. And this is going to cover something called symmetry, which is honestly my favorite and funnest way for me to do rebuttal. It is just proving that something exists on both sides of the house, which makes it not an argument for one particular side. And this is all going to get much more clear when I give you the example, I promise. So this is the third most important key pillar that an argument stands for. This is, it has to be unique to your side of the house. Now we're taking the motion, this House would implement blind voting on all elections. And this motion has an info slide. In a system of blind voting, the voters indicate the preferences on different questions instead of directly voting for a political party. Afterwards, those preferences are matched to a political party with a similar program. The vote is allocated to the party that best represents the voters' preferences. And a prop argument here might be that implementing the system may prevent political parties from being able to buy votes, which will make the results of the election more fair and more democratic, which will in turn then lead to more voter satisfaction and more voters and a larger amount of voters with a less corrupt system. Now, here, what I'm going to do is dispute the uniqueness of that argument, because I believe that there are a lot of other ways to stop bot votes than to implement this whole another policy of elections that may bring it with it its own sets of very unique troubles. So, why I believe that bot voters are symmetric on both sides of the house, why they exist in the proposition and the opposition, and the proposition aren't really solving that issue. Since parties know what their political ideologies are, they can just tell bot voters what to look for and vote for. So, because political ideologies are more or less unchanging and they're limited, there's not an unlimited variety of political ideologies, because the most important questions in certain elections are very specific and they're one and the same for every party. Parties can just tell the bot voter, okay, I believe in this, this, and this, and you're gonna vote for this, this, and this. So now I'm proving why that proposition, the proposition's argument exists in both worlds and they do not solve that. And now here I'm going to prove that both votes can be severely mitigated by first of all, better citizen activity, stricter laws on the matter, and more involved police activity during elections. This all achieves the desired impact in a more effective manner without bearing the problems that come with blind voting, which may be voter disappointment or even more deception from politicians, which I would tell you why that happens and analyze that for you, but we do not have physical time right now. And with that, I'm gonna ask for some questions because that was a lot of information, and I promise this is all gonna be posted on YouTube. So if you have anything that's kind of unclear, you can rewatch it. I know this was a large info dump, so please, questions, unmute yourself because I cannot see the chat, or maybe I can. Okay, questions, please. When will it post it on YouTube? I am not sure, as soon as physically possible as we can make it happen and be edited. Anybody else? Oh, this is unfortunate. All right. Then I'm gonna move on to the tips. First tip: quality over quantity. Don't try to spread yourself too thin and address every single statement made by the other team. It is better to do in-depth rebuttal, go for the bigger parts of the case of the other side, do it with a higher quality, with more levels, rather than trying to disprove every single sentence. This is going to make your rebuttal more effective and their case overall weaker, which is kind of similar to prioritizing depth. Don't focus on individual statements. This is a large mistake that people make. First of all, they may focus on the wrong things. Don't lose your time disputing examples, disputing single case statements. That is not impactful in the debate. Try to take the larger idea. Try to take the large argument and try to tackle the whole argument and the logical links within it, rather than attacking every single thing individually, because I Trust me, you do not have time for that. 3. Don't leave full arguments standing. This might be deciding for the winner of the debate. Even if an argument looks difficult, even if it looks almost unrebuttable, do your best. Just try it. Give it a shot, because it's so much worse to just leave it hanging and give up in front of the big majestic argument than to just give it your all, try to rebuttal it, do your best, and maybe you end up swaying the judge to some extent. 4. Consider the best case. Oh my god, my accent. Consider the best case of the opposing team. What does that mean? A lot of debaters like to assume the worst of the other's arguments and just try to rebuttal that. This is not effective. This leaves holes in your rebuttal. Instead, take the best case of the opposing team. What if their argument and their world worked perfectly? What if everything just went great? How would you rebuttal that? Don't assume that they said less than they did, because they might have not. You might be biased in the round. So just consider that the opposition might be doing a great job and you really need to put the work in order to rebuttal that argument. Another important point that I am not following is 5. Keep track of the time. Don't lose yourself in rebuttal. I've done that one too many times, spending 5 minutes on rebuttal and then I have no time for arguments. A very, very, very bad idea. Unfortunately, as much as I'd like it to be, the second speeches are not only rebuttal. And then 6, learn how to think on the spot. This is very important. You cannot always have pre-written rebuttal in a debate. You have to know what you're going to say in the debate. You have to be able to hear and think of rebuttal. And time management, and I'm going to try to be quick here. This is a very simple timeline of how much I think every single segment should take. First of all, you do your introduction, your hook, and your roadmap, which I don't believe should take you more than 30 seconds. If you're taking more than 30 seconds, I'm going to think that either your rebuttal or your arguments is weak, because you're losing my time and you're losing your own time. Defense and rebuttal. Defending your own arguments from the other side's rebuttal and then rebuttaling their arguments should take you about 3 minutes. As I've said, try not to lose yourself there. Try not to spend a whole bunch of time on that, because you're not going to have time for constructive content later. Try to extend your existing arguments, add more analysis or impact, and maybe possibly an example with some of the analysis for kind of a minute and a half. So then you can have a whole 3 minutes to present your third argument, analyze it well, be able to impact it so the argument is strong and it stands meaningful in the debate. So now we can all take a breath, because that was all I had to say. And I'm ready for more questions, and I'm praying you can give me some. I love questions. PUI me. Okay, so you either understood nothing that came out of my mouth or everything, and I'm gonna assume that you understood nothing, for which I am sorry. But I guess thank you and happy hating, because it's a favorite thing.